Hey, welcome back to our show. I again want to welcome KQEW, that's Fordyce, Arkansas, 102.3 FM. News station, that's South Central Arkansas, up around Lake Ouachita. Wonderful lake up that way, and our listeners come into my home state of Louisiana, so welcome to you folks who listen to us regularly here on the Common Sense Network. By the way, next week we'll be in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, University of Alabama, going up for a nephew's graduation. We're going to be broadcasting. I want to thank the folks at the University of Alabama for making their resources available to us for broadcasting. And the following week we'll be in the Asheville-Boone area in North Carolina. Be up there at Appalachian State University, and glad to join those folks up there to have some of their people on the show, see what's going on in that part of the country. Again, we'll be broadcasting live, so hope you'll join us at our regular time throughout the country. I want to welcome a number of our new listeners. I'm amazed at the number of people we get over the internet who come from outside the United States. 22% of our audience comes from outside the United States. We've got about 9% from China, 10% from Russia, a good European listenership. I think in the Middle East and the Far East, a lot of those listeners want to learn English, and I'm glad they're using my show for that purpose. Hope you pick up some English, maybe with a little bit of a southern twang that you get here on our program. But we are glad you're listening, and I hope you'll regularly do so. And by the way, you can email me on our website, which is www.jimbrownusa.com. Get the email address. Glad to hear from you, answer any of your questions. Again, our heart goes out to those families of those poor kids killed over in Oslo, Norway. One of the tragic things about the event was it took an hour and a half for the SWAT teams to get onto the island where all these kids were. Looks like the death toll is going to be just under 100 of those kids who were shot. And the policemen, first of all, they didn't have a helicopter available. Have you been to Oslo? I've been to Oslo, Norway, huge city. I can't believe they couldn't commandeer a helicopter either through a medical facility. You would think that the state, the military, would have helicopters available in a case like this. In the largest city, I could understand in a rural area, this is the largest city in all of Norway, no helicopter available. Then they had to look for a boat. They didn't have a boat to get onto the island. And while all this is going on, you saw pictures, I'm sure, on the internet, or you've seen them on the news, of the helicopters, a helicopter news facility that focused down on the shooting, and you can see the people in the water getting shot. The guy just picked them off with a high-powered rifle. A terrible, terrible situation. It brings back the black swan theory that if it's possible to happen, eventually it could well happen. And nobody knows that better than us living down here in Louisiana after the hurricane activity, particularly Katrina, where we could have minimized the deaths and minimized the tragic loss of property and damage and so much personal turmoil if we'd been more prepared. Federal government, as we've talked about before, did a poor job. The Canadian Mounted Police made it down to the tip of my home state of Louisiana, Plaquemine Parish. The Canadian Mounted Police got there before the 87th Airborne, before any federal troops even arrived. We had a breakdown in communications. There was no coordination between the federal and the state government. We found the same thing true to some degree with the flooding up in the Midwest, with tornadoes that took place. We're learning as experience goes along, but these folks up in Oslo have got a lot of learning to do, because you've got to have a helicopter available for something like that. You have to assume the worst is going to happen. And you have to give it to our military. I've talked recently to someone that was very involved with the CIA and the military planning. The computers work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, doing the what-if scenario. What if this country would blow up a nuclear weapon? What would we do? How would it affect our relationship with Israel and all these other countries? And where would we move in? What forces are available to play the war games? They do that constantly. We don't seem to do that as much when it comes to natural disasters. We ought to be doing the same kind of game planning all the time, and I think more and more we are. But we've seen breakdowns in this country. We saw breakdowns in Japan with that nuclear reactor that had some problems that should have been identified earlier, would have minimized the damage there. And we certainly did in Oslo, Norway, where many young people lost their lives because of the lack of response time, the lack of the SWAT teams to be able to get on a helicopter. They should have been there in 20, 30 minutes. I mean, this is a matter of 200 yards off the coast of Oslo, in the largest city in Norway. That never should have happened to the extent it did. So hopefully some lessons learned, lessons that we'll pick up ourselves. I hope we do some soul searching. But our scenario about a crazy shooter that would do something like this in this country, the bombs, not much you can do about that other than the pre-surveillance trying to identify the people involved. When it comes to taking a rifle and picking somebody off and you're in a major city and it takes you an hour and a half, God forbid that would ever happen in this country. We hope we learn a long lesson from that terrible, tragic event that affects us all. We'll be right back right after this message.